She stood outside her own home, her hands trembling as she clutched a suitcase. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that felt like a punch to her gut. She had never imagined it would come to this. The place that had been her sanctuary, the space where she had given so much of herself, now felt like a prison. A home she had opened to others, only to be kicked out of. She could hear the faint voices through the walls, her boyfriend, his family, people she had helped when they had lost everything. Yet now, they were the ones who had made her feel like she was the one who did not belong. The confusion and hurt swirled in her chest, making it hard to breathe. What had happened? How did it come to this? Her thoughts raced, but there was no answer. She had given so much, and now, in return, she was standing alone in the cold, abandoned by those she thought she could trust. Her relationship with Mark had always felt like a dream at first. They had met through mutual friends a few years ago, and their connection was instant. He was kind, attentive, and seemed to understand her in ways few people did. She, in turn, was drawn to his warmth and easy smile, the way he made her feel safe and cherished. They fell in love quickly, and their life together seemed perfect. At least, that was how it appeared on the surface. She was nurturing by nature, always looking for ways to help and care for the people she loved. Mark had quickly become the center of her world, and she gave him everything. She was generous, sometimes to a fault, believing in the best of people and always striving to be the person who could lift others up. But as time passed, there were small moments, fleeting instances, when she questioned his actions. He would get distant when she needed him the most, or he would promise things he never followed through on. At the time, she dismissed these as simple flaws in a complicated relationship, things she could work through with patience and understanding. After all, he was her partner, and she believed in him. Then came the crisis. Mark's family had always been a bit of a mystery to her. She had met them only a few times in the past, but they were warm and welcoming in their own way. His mother was kind-hearted, always trying to make sure everyone around her felt comfortable. His father was quiet but seemed to carry a weight with him, as if the world had been too harsh on him over the years. His siblings were a mix of personalities, but they all seemed close, united in their struggles. She never expected much from them, but they were always polite and appreciative of her presence. That was, until everything began to fall apart for them. Mark's family had hit a financial disaster, one thing after another piling up until they found themselves on the verge of losing their home. That was when Mark came to her with a request that would change everything. "They need us," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. "They need somewhere to stay, just until they get back on their feet." He asked, as though it was a simple favor. And in that moment, she could not say no. The idea of turning her back on them, especially after they had always been there for Mark, felt impossible. So she opened her home, offered her space, her time, and her heart to the people who meant so much to him. She had no idea that in doing so, she was setting the stage for a betrayal that would shatter everything she knew. The collapse came quickly, as things often do when everything begins to unravel. It started with Mark's father, who had been working for years at a job he had always hated but kept because it was steady. The company he worked for suddenly announced a mass layoff, and just like that, he was out of work. Then, Mark's mother, who had been struggling with a chronic illness for months, was forced to stop working completely. Medical bills began piling up faster than they could pay them. The stress of it all weighed heavily on Mark's family, and within weeks, they found themselves facing the unthinkable, eviction. Their home, the place they had lived for decades, was no longer theirs. The sense of panic set in, and that was when Mark came to her. He sat her down one night, his face pale, and his eyes full of fear. "I do not know what else to do," he said, his voice shaking. "They are going to lose everything. Can we help them? Can we take them in, just until they get back on their feet?" She could see the desperation in his eyes, the pleading in the way he spoke. Mark had always been protective of his family, even when they were difficult or demanding. She understood that. It was part of what drew her to him, his loyalty, his sense of responsibility. But as much as she wanted to help, something inside her hesitated. She had never considered that this kind of situation would come to her doorstep. Her life, which had been peaceful and predictable, was about to change forever. Despite the nagging doubts in the back of her mind, she agreed to help. How could she not? The idea of turning her back on people in need, especially Mark's family, seemed impossible. They had always been kind to her, even if their relationship was not without its complexities. So she told Mark she would open her home, that she would make room for his family. She felt as though this was the right thing to do, the compassionate thing. At first, it felt like it would be temporary. A few months, maybe. She would help them get back on their feet, they would find new jobs, pay off their debts, and everything would go back to normal. She told herself that this was a small sacrifice to make for the people she loved. In the days that followed, she rearranged her entire life. Her home was comfortable, but it was not large, and now it would be filled with more people than she was used to. She cleared out a spare room for Mark's parents, converted her office into a bedroom for his younger brother and sister, and prepared the living room for his other sibling and her young children. She had to adjust the way she did things. Cooking became a larger task, and she found herself spending hours in the kitchen, making enough food to feed everyone. The laundry multiplied, the house seemed smaller, and she was stretched thinner by the day. She thought of it as a temporary inconvenience, a small price to pay for helping those in need. She did not mind the extra work. After all, she was doing this out of love. She could do it. She was strong, and she was capable. She could take care of them. Mark seemed grateful at first. He constantly praised her for her generosity, for her willingness to sacrifice her space and time to help his family. "You are amazing," he would say, his voice full of admiration. "I do not know what we would do without you." She smiled, feeling a warm sense of pride each time he said those words. His family expressed their thanks as well, though it was less frequent. It was often more of an obligation than true gratitude. They would say things like, "We appreciate everything you are doing for us," but it did not quite reach the depth of genuine thanks. Still, she told herself it was okay. She did not need their praise. She was doing what was right. But the longer the family stayed, the more she realized how much her life had changed. The house was crowded, noisy, and filled with tension. There was little privacy, and she often found herself tiptoeing around the house, trying not to disturb anyone, trying to avoid conflicts. At first, she had been the one to cook, clean, and manage the household. But soon, she was doing all of it, as the family fell into a pattern of dependence. Mark's father sat at home all day, watching television and occasionally offering a few words of thanks, but never helping with any of the chores. Mark's mother was often too ill to do much, and while she expressed appreciation, it was clear that she could not contribute in the way that would have been helpful. Mark's siblings, though young, were capable of helping around the house, but they seemed to do the bare minimum. She began to feel the strain of doing everything herself. She was beginning to lose track of the days, the hours, the moments that were meant to be her own. She had given so much of herself, but there was no space left for her anymore. And still, Mark praised her. Every time she felt overwhelmed, he would tell her how grateful he was. He would talk about how his family could never repay her for what she had done, how he knew it had to be hard on her. "You are incredible," he would say. "I do not know anyone else who could do what you are doing. You are keeping us all together." She would smile, even though a part of her wanted to scream. But she told herself that it was worth it. She was doing this out of love, and one day, things would go back to normal. Her sacrifices would make it all worth it. After all, she had opened her home to them. She had made it work. And they had made it clear that they appreciated everything she did. At least, that was what she told herself. The house, once a cozy haven, began to feel suffocating as the days passed. It was no longer just her and Mark. There were now his parents, his younger siblings, and their children, all crammed into spaces that were never meant to accommodate so many people. The kitchen, which used to be her sanctuary, was now filled with the sounds of constant chatter, children running around, and the clatter of pots and pans as everyone seemed to gather there, always needing something. The bathroom, once her private retreat, was now shared by what felt like an entire army. She started to feel like a stranger in her own home, as if the space she had once filled with personal belongings and memories was now an extension of someone else's life. At first, she tried to maintain harmony. She did what she had always done, organizing, cooking, cleaning, and making sure everyone's needs were met. She would wake up early in the morning, prepare breakfast for the entire household, and then go about her day, juggling tasks as best as she could. But no matter how hard she worked, the house always seemed to get messy, and the demands never stopped. The laundry piled up, the dishes never seemed to be done, and the bills mounted faster than she could pay them. It was exhausting. She did not mind the work at first, telling herself it was temporary and that it was her responsibility to make sure they were comfortable. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the appreciation she once hoped for began to fade. Mark's family never offered to help. They rarely pitched in, and when they did, it was often half-hearted. His father, who had been so grateful at first, now spent most of his time on the couch, watching television and leaving the housework to her. His mother, who had been too ill to work, still seemed too exhausted to do anything around the house. The children were young, but there was no reason they could not help with simple tasks. Yet, they seemed to avoid any responsibility, leaving her to shoulder the burden alone. The lack of gratitude was perhaps the hardest part. She had hoped that, in time, they would recognize the effort she was putting in and offer their thanks, but that never came. Instead, they acted as though she was simply expected to take care of everything. They would walk past her as she cleaned, never acknowledging the work she was doing. Mark, too, began to slip away from the responsibility. He had always been supportive in the beginning, praising her for her willingness to help, but as time went on, he seemed to side more and more with his family. It started with small things, like him letting his mother dictate how meals should be prepared, or him offering excuses when she asked for help. "She just needs time to get better," he would say, though it had been months, and his mother still did not seem to be improving. He would brush off her concerns about the mounting bills or the lack of respect his family was showing. "They are going through a tough time," he would say, his voice soft with sympathy, as if that should explain everything. She tried to talk to him, to express how overwhelmed she felt, but every time she did, it seemed as though her feelings were dismissed. "You knew this was going to be hard," he would say. "They need us, and we need to stick together as a family." It was a line he had repeated so often that it felt like a mantra, a way of justifying his silence, his distance. He would often make excuses for his family, explaining away their lack of gratitude or effort. It became clear to her that he was no longer seeing her needs, no longer understanding the toll this was taking on her. She began to feel invisible, as though she was nothing more than a caretaker, a maid who was expected to serve without question or reward. It was not just the lack of gratitude that wore on her, it was the constant crossing of her boundaries. She had always prided herself on being accommodating, but there were limits, and those limits were being tested every day. The house, once her sanctuary, had become a place where she no longer felt at home. She had given up so much of herself, so much of her privacy, and it was starting to feel like she was being taken for granted. Her personal space, her belongings, even her time, everything was being used without consideration. Mark's family would leave their things everywhere, as though the house belonged to them now. They would help themselves to food in the fridge, leaving nothing behind for her or Mark. Her favorite chair in the living room had become a place where someone else would sit without asking. Her books, her pictures, her things, nothing was untouched. At first, she had been patient, telling herself that it was only temporary, that it would all be over soon. But soon, her patience began to wear thin. She started to feel like a guest in her own home. Her routines, the ones that had once brought her peace, were no longer hers to keep. She could no longer walk into the kitchen and cook her favorite meals without someone standing behind her, offering unsolicited advice or complaining about the food. She could no longer retreat to her room at the end of a long day to unwind and have some quiet time. Instead, her room was always full of people, always busy with the sound of children playing or someone asking for something. Her sanctuary was gone. She had become the servant, the one who took care of everyone, but no one seemed to care that she was falling apart. Mark, too, seemed to forget the woman who had been there for him before all of this began. The woman who had once been his partner, his equal. Now, she was just the one who took care of everything. She started to feel as though she was invisible to him, as though her needs, her feelings, her exhaustion were not worth acknowledging. He had become more focused on his family, and less focused on her. And slowly, her resentment began to grow. She had given up so much to help them, to make them comfortable, and yet, all she felt in return was loneliness. She was no longer the woman Mark had fallen in love with. She was just the one who took care of the house, of his family, and of his needs. She started to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake, if she had given up too much of herself in the name of helping others. But by then, it felt too late to take it all back. She had already given them everything. The changes were subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But with time, they began to add up, piece by piece, until the walls that had once felt like home were closing in around her. The family, who had once seemed so grateful for her help, started to make her feel more like a stranger. Conversations that she had once been a part of now seemed to happen behind closed doors. She would walk into a room, and immediately, the chatter would quiet down. Eyes would shift away from her, and the warmth she had once felt from them vanished, replaced by a cold, unspoken distance. It was as though they were actively excluding her, as though she was no longer a part of the family, just the person who had opened her home to them. At first, she tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just tired, or maybe they were stressed. She told herself she was overthinking it, but the small signs kept piling up. The family began making decisions without consulting her. They would make plans for the day, discuss what they wanted for dinner, or even rearrange things in the house without asking for her input. It was as if she had lost her place in her own home. Her belongings, once neatly arranged and in their rightful spots, began to disappear or be moved around without her permission. Her favorite mug was no longer in the kitchen, and her books were scattered around the house as though they belonged to someone else. The peaceful routines she had once cherished were no longer hers to keep. They were all disrupted, little by little. She found herself waking up to chaos, with no space for herself. The once orderly, calm mornings she used to enjoy were now replaced by noise, confusion, and the sense that she had no control over anything in her own life. Her needs were constantly ignored. She would ask for a moment of quiet, for a little time alone, but the family did not seem to care. The requests she made, simple things like asking for help with cleaning or even just asking for respect for her space, were met with dismissal. They acted as though her needs were not as important as theirs, and every time she spoke up, she felt the weight of their indifference. It was as though her presence no longer mattered. Mark's behavior only made everything worse. She tried to talk to him about how she was feeling, about how she felt invisible in her own home, but instead of offering comfort or understanding, he brushed her concerns aside. "You're just stressed out," he would say. "Everything will be fine. You just need to relax and not take everything so personally." He dismissed her feelings as though they were nothing more than an overreaction, something to be swept away and ignored. When she brought up the fact that his family was excluding her from conversations, he would tell her that it was all in her head, that they didn't mean to make her feel that way. "They are just trying to adjust," he would say. "You have to give them time." But it was never just time. It was a slow, constant erosion of her place in their lives, and she could see it now, even if Mark refused to acknowledge it. As the days went by, the emotional toll began to sink in. She had always been a strong person, someone who could handle challenges and rise above them. But now, she felt as though she was losing a part of herself. Her self-worth, her confidence, everything that had once made her feel whole was being chipped away by the people she had tried so hard to help. The emotional weight was crushing, and there was no relief in sight. She started to question herself, wondering if she was being too sensitive, too needy. Was she expecting too much? The doubt began to settle in, creeping into her mind and feeding her insecurities. She had always been the person who put others first, who tried to be understanding and patient, but now, she found herself wondering if she had made a mistake in trusting them, in giving so much of herself. Her relationship with Mark was becoming more strained by the day. She felt like she was talking to a wall when she tried to express her feelings. He was no longer the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once been her partner. Now, he was distant, almost as though he was siding more with his family than with her. She had always been his priority, or so she had thought, but now it felt as though he was more concerned about keeping the peace with his family than standing up for her. She had become an outsider in her own life, and she could feel the emotional distance growing between them. It was becoming harder and harder to hide her feelings. She found herself withdrawing, avoiding conversations with her friends and family. She did not want to burden them with her troubles, but the isolation was starting to take its toll. She began to feel as though there was no one she could turn to, no one who would understand. She had always been the strong one, the one who people came to for support, but now, she felt as though she had no strength left to give. The emotional toll of being constantly overlooked, of being gaslit by the person she loved, was wearing her down. She had always been the one who held everything together, but now, she was unraveling. She started to journal her thoughts, trying to make sense of the chaos in her mind. It was the only way she could process the whirlwind of emotions she was experiencing. She would write late at night, when the house was quiet, and the weight of the day was too much to bear. She poured her heart onto the pages, expressing the hurt, the confusion, and the anger that had built up inside her. It was not easy, but it was the only outlet she had left. Writing allowed her to voice the things she could not say out loud, to confront the reality of what was happening without anyone dismissing it as just her imagination. She wrote about how she felt invisible, about how her boundaries had been crossed and her needs ignored. She wrote about Mark's refusal to see what was happening, about how he had become part of the problem instead of the solution. She also began to reach out to a close friend, someone she had confided in before, someone who had always been there for her. She hesitated at first, not wanting to burden them with her troubles, but eventually, she realized that she needed someone to talk to, someone who would listen and understand. Her friend was shocked when she heard everything, but they reassured her that she was not crazy, that her feelings were valid. You deserve to be treated with respect, they told her. You have given so much, and it's okay to ask for something in return. It was the validation she needed, the reminder that she was not wrong for feeling the way she did. But even with that reassurance, the emotional toll continued to weigh heavily on her, and she began to wonder how much longer she could keep living like this, in a house that no longer felt like hers, surrounded by people who had no regard for her well-being. It had reached a point where she could no longer stay silent. The weight of the emotional strain had become unbearable, and she could feel herself slowly slipping into a place where she could not recognize the woman she once was. She had tried to communicate her feelings, tried to be patient, but nothing had changed. The distance between her and Mark had grown too wide, and the constant disregard from his family had broken something inside her. She could no longer ignore it, could no longer pretend that everything would magically get better. She had to confront them, all of them, the family who had taken her kindness for granted, and Mark, the man she had loved and supported. One evening, when the house was quieter than usual, she decided it was time to have the conversation. She had waited for the right moment, but it never seemed to come, so she knew she would have to make it happen. She called Mark into the living room, where the others were gathered, and asked them all to sit down. The tension in the room was palpable as she looked around at the people she had once considered family. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she was determined. Mark, we need to talk, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. I've been feeling invisible in my own home, and I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. You and your family have been treating me like I don't matter. I've given up so much to help all of you, but no one seems to appreciate it. I'm exhausted, emotionally and physically. I don't even feel like this is my home anymore. She paused, waiting for a response, but the room remained silent. Mark shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, while his family exchanged glances. She could feel the weight of their judgment, but she pressed on. I have been doing everything I can to keep this house running, to take care of all of you, and yet, every day, I am treated like I don't even exist. I don't feel like a part of this family anymore, and it hurts. I need to know that I matter, too. I need respect. I need support. Mark's eyes finally met hers, but there was no warmth in them, no understanding. Instead, he looked defensive, almost annoyed. Look, I get that you're frustrated, he said, his voice low. But you have to understand that my family is going through a tough time. They need us, and you can't just expect everything to be perfect. We are all under a lot of stress. You're overreacting. She felt the sting of his words. Overreacting. How many times had she heard that from him? How many times had he dismissed her feelings as though they were nothing? I'm not overreacting, Mark, she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm telling you how I feel. I'm telling you that I am at my breaking point. I'm not just a maid, a servant who does everything for everyone and gets nothing in return. I need to be seen, I need to be heard, and I need things to change. Instead of acknowledging her pain, Mark turned to his family. Don't you see what she's saying? He asked them, his voice rising slightly. She feels overwhelmed. She's having a hard time. But we are all dealing with so much right now. You need to cut her some slack. The family members shifted in their seats, but no one spoke. It was as if they were all waiting for someone else to take responsibility for what had been happening. His mother, who had once been so grateful for her help, finally spoke, but her words were anything but supportive. You know, it's not just about you, dear, she said, her tone almost cold. We are all going through a rough time here, and you seem to be making it all about yourself. We appreciate what you've done, but we have our own problems to deal with. Maybe you should think about that before you start complaining. Her heart sank. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it, hearing the dismissal of her feelings, made it all the more real. She had given everything to this family, everything, and yet, they were turning on her. They were twisting her words, making her feel like the problem instead of acknowledging the sacrifices she had made. Mark's silence was deafening. He did not stand up for her. He did not acknowledge her pain. Instead, he just sat there, looking conflicted but doing nothing to support her. Maybe you need to just step back for a while, Mark suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. You're clearly upset. Maybe you should go stay with a friend for a bit, just to cool off. We'll figure things out, but it's clear that we all need some space right now. Her chest tightened as she heard those words. It felt like a slap in the face, the ultimate betrayal. She was being asked to leave, to give up her home, her life, her everything, just to make them more comfortable. She had given them everything, and now, they wanted her to walk away as if she were the problem. It was as if all the love, all the support, had been nothing more than a transaction, and now that they had what they needed, she was no longer important. I can't believe this, she said, her voice breaking as the realization hit her. After everything I've done for you, you want me to leave? You want me to go cool off? Like I'm the one who has lost my mind. Mark looked away, his face flushed with guilt, but he did not speak. His family remained silent, watching the exchange unfold with an air of discomfort but no real sympathy. They had made their decision, and she was no longer welcome. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had to be strong, she had to show them that she would not be broken by their betrayal. Fine, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. If that is what you want, if I am so terrible for feeling the way I do, then I will leave. But do not think for a second that I will forget this. I will never forget how you treated me, how you manipulated me into thinking I was the one who was wrong. She turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. She knew that if she stayed, she would only be hurt more. The family she had taken in, the man she had loved, had all turned their backs on her. And in that moment, she realized that it was not just the house she was leaving behind, but a part of herself, a part that had been broken by their actions, a part that she was not sure she could ever get back. The tension in the house had been building for days, each interaction more strained than the last. She could feel the walls closing in, suffocating her. Mark's family, who had once seemed so grateful, now felt like strangers, and Mark, the man she had trusted more than anyone, had become nothing more than a reflection of the people he surrounded himself with. The final straw came one evening when everything she had been bottling up erupted in an explosion of words, hurt, and frustration. It started when she had asked Mark, yet again, to have a conversation. She had tried to stay calm, to approach the subject without accusing anyone, but the conversation quickly devolved into something unrecognizable. She was done being the silent observer in her own life. She was done being the one to bear the weight of everyone else's problems. She needed to be heard. I have had enough, Mark, she shouted, the rawness of her voice filling the room. I can't keep living like this. I cannot keep sacrificing everything for you and your family, only to be treated like I don't exist. I'm done. I need you to understand how this is affecting me. This is not the relationship I signed up for. This is not what I thought I was building with you. Mark's face twisted with frustration. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy, he snapped. You're making this all about you. You've been helping, yes, but you're the one who keeps making things worse by complaining about it all the time. We're going through a crisis here, and you want to turn it into your own personal drama. Her heart sank as his words hit her. She had never once made this about herself. She had only wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged. But now, with every word that came from his lips, it was clear that he had already made up his mind. To him, she was the one at fault. She was the one who had ruined everything. I have been the one who has kept this house running, she continued, voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. I have kept you all fed, kept everything from falling apart. And all I've gotten in return is disrespect. I don't even feel like I have a home anymore. You and your family, you've all made me feel like I don't matter. Mark shook his head, his face hardening. Maybe you just need to get over it, he said dismissively. I'm not going to keep listening to you complain. At that moment, she felt something shift inside her, a cold realization settling in her chest. This was no longer the man she loved. This was someone who had become just as indifferent and selfish as his family. She had been fighting for their relationship, but it was clear now that she had been fighting alone. I can't do this anymore, she said softly, a mixture of sorrow and anger in her voice. I'm done. Before she could say anything else, his mother stepped forward, cutting her off. Maybe it's time for you to leave, she said with a tone so casual it was almost cruel. You're clearly unhappy here, and we can't keep dealing with your constant complaints. You should go stay with a friend for a while and cool off. Her heart dropped. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it out loud was a different kind of hurt. She had opened her home to them, had given everything she had to make sure they were comfortable, and now, they were asking her to leave. She had no choice but to stand there, unable to speak, feeling the weight of betrayal press down on her. I'm sorry, Mark said, his voice barely audible now. But this is for the best. We need space. You need space. His words echoed in her mind as if she had been slapped across the face. She was the one who had given them space, given them everything she had, and now she was the one being forced out. Her chest tightened as she realized something else. She had never been on the lease. Her name was not on the title. She had no legal claim to the house, no rights to anything that had once felt like her home. All this time, she had been living under the false assumption that she had a place here, that her efforts had somehow given her a right to stay. But now it was clear that she had nothing. She turned to look around the room one last time, her suitcase in hand. The house she had once filled with love and care now felt like a foreign place. The furniture, the walls, the familiar sense of her cooking, they all seemed so distant now, stripped of their warmth. She felt like an intruder in the life she had tried so hard to build, and as she walked toward the door, she knew she was leaving more than just a house behind. She was leaving a part of herself, a part that had been broken by the people she had trusted most. When she stepped outside, the cool night air hit her like a sharp reminder of her new reality. She stood there for a moment, her suitcase heavy in her hand, staring at the door she had just walked out of. The world outside felt vast and unfamiliar, and yet, it was the only place she could go now. Her heart ached as she realized how much had been taken from her, how much she had given to people who had never truly cared for her. But she knew she could not go back, not now, not after everything that had happened. The aftermath was just as painful as the moment of exile itself. She had nowhere to go, no place to call her own. She called a few friends, but no one had the space to take her in. Eventually, one of her closest friends offered to let her stay on their couch for a while. It was not the home she had imagined for herself, but it was a roof over her head, and for that, she was grateful. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. She had no idea where to start picking up the pieces of her life, or if she even could. But little by little, she began to heal. The shock of what had happened started to fade, replaced by the slow, painful process of understanding. She began to see things more clearly, and with clarity came the realization that Mark had not been the person she had believed him to be. She began to piece together the subtle hints, the little signs she had ignored at the time, late-night phone calls, the way he had started to pull away. There were whispers in the back of her mind that had once seemed insignificant, but now they made sense. She discovered things about Mark she had never known, things she never would have imagined. There were rumors, unspoken truths, and whispers of infidelity. She could not be sure of everything, but there was enough evidence now to make her question everything about their relationship. She also began to uncover the extent to which his family had taken advantage of her. She had thought she was helping, but in reality, they had been using her. They had never appreciated her. They had never truly respected her. And now, as she sat alone in her friend's apartment, her heart broken and her life turned upside down, she realized that the pain she felt was not just about losing her home. It was about losing herself. The person she had been so consumed by the needs of others that she had forgotten who she was, what she deserved, and what it meant to truly be valued. As she began the painful journey of healing, she knew it would take time. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she also knew that she was free. She had been forced to leave, but in doing so, she had found the strength to start over, to rebuild. And though the road ahead would not be easy, it would be hers to walk. The days that followed her departure were some of the hardest she had ever faced. At first, she felt lost, adrift in a world that no longer seemed familiar. The sense of betrayal gnawed at her, and there were moments when the weight of everything, her ruined relationship, the broken trust, the empty house she had once loved, felt too heavy to bear. But slowly, as the days turned into weeks, she began to heal. It was not a fast process, and it was never easy. She spent countless nights crying herself to sleep, wrestling with the pain of what had happened, but something inside her began to shift. She knew she had to find her way back to herself, to the person she had once been, the person she had almost forgotten in the midst of trying to please everyone else. Therapy became an important part of her healing process. It was in those quiet sessions with her therapist that she began to unravel the layers of her past, to confront the choices she had made, and to understand why she had allowed herself to be treated so poorly. It was through therapy that she learned about boundaries, something she had never really understood before. She had always been the person who gave and gave, never asking for anything in return, believing that love meant self-sacrifice. But now, she realized that love could also mean standing up for herself, setting limits, and not allowing others to take advantage of her kindness. Rebuilding her confidence was a slow and often painful journey. She had to relearn how to trust herself, how to value her own needs and desires. At times, she doubted whether she would ever fully recover from the hurt. But as the weeks passed, she found herself growing stronger. Her self-worth was no longer defined by her ability to please others, and that realization was both liberating and empowering. She began to reclaim her life, piece by piece. She found a new job, one that challenged her, one that made her feel alive again. It was a fresh start, a place where her talents were recognized, where she could prove to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. With this new job came a new sense of independence. She was no longer tethered to the past, no longer defined by the mistakes of her former relationship. She began to save money, planning for her future, creating a life that was entirely her own. Her new apartment, small but cozy, became her sanctuary. The walls were bare at first, but she filled them with art and plants, transforming the space into a reflection of who she had become, someone who had weathered storms and emerged stronger for it. She began to enjoy the peace that came with living alone, the quiet evenings without arguments or tension, the freedom to do what she wanted without fear of judgment. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at home. With each passing day, the woman who had once been overwhelmed by the demands of others began to emerge. She found her voice again, a voice that had been silenced for far too long. She learned how to say no without guilt, how to set boundaries that kept her emotionally safe. She reconnected with friends who had once been pushed aside during her relationship, and they welcomed her back with open arms, offering support and love. It was a slow, steady process, but she was no longer the woman who had been controlled by guilt and fear. She was becoming someone new, someone whole. Months passed, and her life continued to blossom. The wounds of the past had not fully healed, but they no longer defined her. She had moved beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal, and into a future that was full of possibility. She had learned the value of self-care, of taking time to nurture her own needs. Her relationships were healthier now, and she had become more discerning about who she allowed into her life. She no longer tolerated disrespect or manipulation, and that made all the difference. And then, one day, she received a message from Mark's family. It was brief, a simple text that read, "We need your help. Things are falling apart again. Can you come back?" Her heart tightened in her chest as she read the words. For a moment, the old feelings of guilt and obligation resurfaced. She remembered the times when she had been the one to help, the one who had always been there when they needed her. But as quickly as the feelings came, she pushed them away. She had come too far to fall into that trap again. The person she was now would not be the one to sacrifice her happiness for people who had never appreciated her. She stared at the message for a long time, letting the weight of it settle. And then, with a sense of calm certainty, she typed out her response. "I hope things work out for you, but I can't be part of this anymore. I've moved on, and I'm focused on my own life now. I wish you the best." There was no anger in her words, no bitterness. It was simply the truth. She had given enough. She had done enough. And now, she was choosing herself. The family's response was predictable, a mixture of confusion and hurt. They could not understand why she would refuse to help them when they were in trouble again. But that was not her problem anymore. She had learned that sometimes the best way to help others was to let them face the consequences of their own actions. She could not keep saving people who refused to change, who refused to take responsibility for their own lives. It was not her job to carry their burdens any longer. In the end, she realized that the greatest gift she could give herself was the freedom to walk away from situations that drained her, the courage to say no when she needed to. The danger of blind sacrifice had become painfully clear to her. She had sacrificed so much of herself for others, and in the end, it had only left her feeling empty and unappreciated. But now, she knew that her happiness, her peace, and her well-being were just as important as anyone else's. As she continued on her journey of healing and self-discovery, she knew that the road would not always be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and temptations to fall back into old patterns. But she also knew that she was stronger now. She had learned to trust herself, to stand up for her own needs, and to create a life that was truly her own. And that was a strength that no one could ever take away from her. In the end, starting over had been the best thing she could have done. She had rediscovered who she was, what she was capable of, and what she deserved. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that she was finally ready to live a life that was truly her own, one built on self-love, boundaries, and the unwavering belief that she was worthy of the happiness and peace she had once only dreamed of.